So I lied in my last video when I said my Stormbringer guide was up to date. There are new developments that have been made since then. There is a new Ascendance Rotation that people are doing, and the buff to Tempest means you are prioritizing spending above all again. If you want to know the basics of Stormbringer, my last guide is valid, but the opener and priority I will expand on in this video. Now before we start talking about Ascendance, I want to give a list of our goals during it. And I describe Enhance as a spec that makes decisions based on random amounts of resource gain, meaning that these goals are not always achievable and sometimes you have to settle for less. The preliminary goal, goal 0, is to have as many Tempests stacked up as possible before you enter Ascendance. The first goal is that because Tempest is now by far our biggest damage spell, we want to cast it with 10 Maelstrom when possible. The second goal is that Primordial Storm scales very well with wolves, so we want to cast it with as many wolves as possible. And the third goal is that we want to fill with as many windstrikes as possible, while still achieving the other goals. And this might be a bit confusing, but these goals are what the rotation is designed around to maximize these things. Now, I'm going to give a similar piece of information in 3 different visual representations here. I think it's a bit hard to fully explain. Here is a timeline of a standard AoE Ascendance. You have already spread Flame Shock and you will have 2 Tempests saved up. You're going to press a Primordial Wave regardless of your Maelstrom. Overcapping is fine. This will start an 8-second window where you have 6 Lightning Rods and a 12-second window for Splintered Elements 30% haste. You're going to press a Tempest immediately and then enter Ascendance to maximize Ascendance uptime in these 2 buffs. We will probably be on low Maelstrom after pressing our Ascendance, so we will press a Crash Lightning and then our second Tempest. And then after that, we are just spamming Windstrike until we get our third Tempest. We will use our third Tempest, and then halfway through our Ascendance, we are entering Doomwinds. And the reason for this is because we are buffing our Doomwinds window with a lot of dogs, as opposed to just 1 or 2. Now here is a more condensed timeline. This is what a sample sequence could look like. This is not a guideline because the rotation will always change based on random variables like awakening storms, target count, and static accumulation resets. But this might be a good visualization on how the windows look. And here's a flowchart of the way we make decisions, namely after we cast Doomwinds. Say we have a Tempest. That means you would be looking to spend that Tempest. If you have full Maelstrom, you would spend it. If you had low Maelstrom, you would not be able to spend it. So instead, you would press Crash Lightning. If you have Primordial Storm and it's about to expire, you would treat it in the same way, using the same logic. And then otherwise, you're pressing Windstrike. And the 3 main reasons we are doing this opener is 1, we are pressing Primordial Wave early to maximize Lightning Rod damage. 2, we are pressing Doomwinds late to maximize the Doomwinds and Primordial Storm damage through Rolling Thunder Dogs. And 3, we are maximizing Maelstrom spent for more Tempests. Alright, so here are some clips I want to show you of these openers. This is the first pull of Rookery. I have 2 Tempests and 10 Maelstrom going in from the pre-pull. I walk in, I press Flame Shock into Lava Lash to spread, and then I instantly go into a Primordial Wave even though it overcaps me on Maelstrom. I'm going to press Tempest here, then I press a Crash Lightning because I'm getting forced out of melee. I go Ascendance, and then I'm spamming a few Windstrikes until I get a Tempest. I press that Tempest. I wasn't 10 Maelstrom because I was forced out of melee, but it's whatever. And I continue to Windstrike until I get my third Tempest. I press my third Tempest, I press my Doomwinds, and I press my Primordial Storm because with these Awakening Storms procs, there was no way I was going to get a 4th Tempest before the Primordial Storm expired. Now, from this point onwards, I'm just pressing Windstrike, I get 1 Tempest, and I press that 1 Tempest. Now, this was a very unlucky pull. I did not get a Tempest proc from Awakening Storms, I did not get any resets. So this is basically like the lower bound. This is what your rotation would look like if you got no procs. Alright, so here is a bit of a different pull. It's the first pull of Priory. My Tempest is almost running out. I'm going to use 1 Tempest very early and then use my Arc Discharge Chain Lightning, which has a weird interaction where it refreshes Tempest. Then I will use this Voltaic Blaze that I procced with a Crash Lightning, and I will use Primordial Wave to spread Lightning Rods and then Tempest. And then I'll enter Ascendance, spam a few Windstrikes. I get my third Tempest, I use that. I have 3 Awakening, so I go for a 4th Tempest, I use a 4th Tempest, and then I go into Doomwinds. Now, realistically here, I should go for a 5th Tempest before I press Primordial Storm, but I don't do it, and I just press Crash Lightning into Primordial Storm, and then I press Tempest, and then I'm just spamming Windstrike for the remainder of my Ascendance. So here is a different clip. This is a no lust pull. I have no Tempest going in, but I do have 27 Progress, 3 Awakening going in. So I can realistically proc a Tempest pretty early. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk into the pack, waiting for my tank for a bit. We walk into the pack, I'm going to Flame Shock and spread it because I don't want to press too fast for aggro. So I Flame Shock, spread, I press a few Chain Lightnings, and that gives me a Tempest. And now that I have a Tempest, I can enter Ascendance. I do Primordial Wave, Tempest, Ascendance, and now I'm just windstriking. I press this Tempest when I get to 10, and I press that Doom Winds. I probably pressed it a little bit earlier, but it doesn't really matter in the end. As long as it's not just like the first global, it's completely fine to do it like that. And now I'm just pressing Windstrike, press a Crash Lightning into a Primordial Storm because I wasn't really going to get another Tempest before that ran out. Okay, so what's important in these clips is that I always aim to have multiple Tempests going to Ascendance. So I wanted to talk about pooling. Essentially, Stormbringer is a very much of a cooldown based spec, but your major cooldown is actually Tempests. If you walk into pack with 4 Tempests back to back, then you will do way more damage than if you went into a pack, pressed Ascendance, and then spammed Windstrike for 15 seconds with no Tempest. So we look at Stormbringer as a 30-second spec with Primordial Wave, which is a very strong cooldown. Essentially gives you Lust and a lot of lightning rod damage. We are committing a certain amount of Tempest to each Primordial Wave. I drew up a timeline here where you could say you've saved up 2 Tempests. You're a minute into the pool, you've saved up 2 Tempests, you press Primordial Wave. You spend those 2 Tempests and then maybe a third. And then after that, Splintered Elements is over. We don't really want to press Tempest while nothing is happening. We are just going to keep spamming Chain Lightning until a minute 30, where we will again commit our Tempest with our Primordial Wave. And after that, Ascendance is going to be coming up. We're about a minute 40 into the pool. We're going to put extra stress on pooling. We are hard not using Tempests. We are just using Chain Lightning, saving up as many Tempests as we can for this Ascendance. And here is a simple rule. If you are pressing Ascendance in 20 seconds and you have a Tempest, you are spending on Chain Lightning, even in single target. Now here's a clip of single target of my efforts to pre-stack, pre-pull Tempest before an Ascendance. So I press Primordial Wave, and I'm using my Tempest with this Primordial Storm because that's how I should use Tempests. Now, I get 20 seconds before my Ascendance. I proc a Tempest, and now I'm just building up Maelstrom. I'm going to build up to 10. I'm not going to use this Tempest. I'm going to use Chain Lightning on single target, and I'm just using Chain Lightning on single target. I get to 1 Tempest, 2 Awakening, 34 Progress, and now I'm ready to start my Ascendance. I press a Wave. I press Doom Winds, and then I enter Ascendance. I'm primed to Chain Lightning. So that is something you need to think about. You don't want to be primed to Chain Lightning. I should have just pressed one of the Tempests before I entered Ascendance, but I do just manually press a Tempest there. And now I'm just pressing Windstrike every global. I press Primordial Storm before my Doom Winds ends, and now I'm just pressing Windstrike every global some more. And this is a pretty high single target Ascendance because I managed to use 5 Tempests. I went out to 5 Dogs at the end there. That was pretty good, I would say. To talk about cooldown usage if you're desynced, you always want to pair Primordial Wave with Ascendance. It is a massive haste boost. Delay one of them for the other depending on your timings. It is very big. Doom Winds is not very important in comparison. You don't really need to pair it with anything. If you are pulling a pack and Ascendance is in 30 seconds, it is fine to just send Doom Winds there and not have it for Ascendance. Now, I have some slides from my last guide that are now incorrect. Here's my updated priority list for non-cooldown spells. You are looking to spend, and if you can't spend, then you're looking to build with Stormstrike or Crash Lightning, dependent on target count. Voltaic Blaze is used to refresh Flame Shocks, or as a builder if you only need 1 Maelstrom. And Lava Lash is unimportant unless you need to refresh Flame Shocks. And for how much we spend on, we aim to spend at 9 to 10, but we are fine with spending lower if we cannot efficiently get Maelstrom at the time. And this is the talent build. Tempest Strikes over Elemental Blast in M+ always. You can experiment with other things like Dre for fun, but I don't think you'll beat this build in Mythic+.